Hi guys, and welcome to week 14. We're going to be talking about assessment in general and then digital assessment specifically as you create some examples that you could use in your HyperDocs lesson. But I want you to become familiar with summative and formative assessment overall and tell what the difference is. You should have already completed this activity, but if you haven't, then the link will be there as well. And it's just talking about the differences and similarities between formative and summative assessment. I already made a video about what I expect for you to do there, but by the time you listen to this video, you should have already completed that, and you can go to the link there if you want to see what other people have done. But I want to just talk a little bit about assessment, and it looks like a cycle on purpose because planning informs instruction, as you can see here, and assessment has a big part in all of that. And so in the planning stage, you are helping students build their content understanding. So you're choosing content resources for that. You are thinking about your students and supporting their learning needs. So differentiation. You're using your knowledge of your students. You are then thinking about assessments to monitor student understanding or student learning. So you're not going to just assess something at the end of a lesson. You're going to be using those formative assessments throughout the lesson as you're teaching, as you're interacting, as you're observing. And so that leads to your instruction here. So you're going to be thinking about designing, as we've been talking about designing the HyperDocs lesson you're doing. It's not just about the content resources and objectives and other things that you have for the lesson. It's also about the environment that you set up. So think about that as you think about instruction, the learning environment, how the students are actually going to be engaged. And you're going to need to be thinking about that throughout your HyperDocs lesson too. As you think about how they're going to interact, what are they actually going to do to show their learning at specific points throughout the lesson. You're also going to be thinking about how you can deepen thinking instead of just having it all surface level, and then subject-specific pedagogy. So you might use a specific thing in science that you would not use in math, or use it in English that you would not use in social studies. Okay, so throughout, as you plan for instruction, then when you're actually doing the instruction, you're going to be analyzing that teaching. How are the students really responding to that? You're going to make adjustments along the way. Now, with your HyperDocs lesson, this is going to be a little bit more difficult, but if you are doing something in class and students are doing portions of that HyperDoc, you're going to be able to adjust and react to their needs. So as you're analyzing teaching, you're going to be using these assessment tools kind of all throughout, but you're going to be analyzing student learning. You're going to be providing feedback. And in a digital environment, you can do that a lot simpler. Sometimes to get to every student, it takes more time, but you can do it and personalize that feedback that you give each student. So, and then you can support the students to use that feedback to make their products even better. And so from that assessment, then you use that data to drive your instruction, but also to plan again. So that's why it looks like a cycle. I wanted to put this in this presentation as well, because I think this is really important that we see that the student and the teacher both have roles to play throughout the teaching and learning process, and also with assessment specifically. So the student is paying attention. So there's a lot of metacognition going on. They're thinking about how they're learning, what they're not understanding. So self-monitoring is really big. You need to give them time to reflect on their learning. So as you think about your HyperDocs lesson situation, you need to have times in there where they are writing down their thoughts, giving their ideas, taking notes. However you have them do that, you need to have it inside the learning process. And then they also analyze evidence of thinking and understanding. So students aren't going to do this naturally. You're going to need to teach them how to think about whether they understand or not. And so those are lessons in and of themselves. So the student and the teacher need to understand the learning goals, targets, and standards. And so as the teacher, you are establishing those, so you need to make them evident to the student. So you still have a role to play. you're adjusting instructional strategy based on evidence. So just like in this prior image that it showed, that you're changing based on your students' needs and how they're reacting, that's that adjusting instructional strategy. So you're collecting and analyzing evidence. So this could be, a post on a Padlet. It could be a question on a Google Doc. It could be a comment that they make or a Flipgrid question. There's lots of different ways that you can collect evidence. You can also do it through observation. So if you're in your classroom and students are not understanding, you might see them exhibit different behaviors than if they are engaged in really understanding. And then you are going to also analyze evidence of that thinking and understanding as well, because that helps you then plan for instruction. So I kind of modified the diagram from before to show you different places that you could put formative assessment. So in the planning stages and before you're using or doing instruction, you're going to be using those assessments from this part over here. You're going to be using them as you plan and as you actually teach. And formative assessment goes on the entire time you are teaching, whether it is documented or not. You are observing, you are adjusting. And then over here in the assessment part, you have both formative and summative assessments that go on. Especially when you get to the end of a unit, you get to the end of a lesson. Usually it's more than just one lesson a summative assessment would be involved in. So there are several misunderstandings about assessment, and I took these directly from an article that you could have chosen to read, 6 Common Misunderstandings About Assessment, because I thought they were really valuable for us to understand. So the first one, assessment and evaluation are the same thing. They are not. Evaluation is when you are putting a grade on something. Assessment is, you can think about it more as an ongoing activity. I'm assessing the situation, I'm figuring out what I need to do differently, but evaluation is actually putting the grade on it. Most assessment is summative. That is not true. Like I was talking about before with these different graphics, you have assessment going on all the time. And so that is formative assessment. The summative is when it's at the very end. Assessment is one-way communication. The teacher gives feedback on student work. This should not be the only way that assessment is done. Yes, you should give feedback, but there should be an ongoing conversation about how to make that better. So it shouldn't just be they turn in a paper, you put some comments on it, and that's the last time the students even look at it. There should be an ongoing conversation, and Google Docs helps to make that easily done. But there are other tools that you can use as well. I know some teachers who use voice comments, and those are really neat because it personalizes the feedback. But I want you to look at assessment as more than just a one-way street. And assessment, this is another misunderstanding. Assessment is for grading purposes. No, assessment should be for growth and progress on the student's achievement. Student work should be given a grade or a mark, not always. And that kind of messes with some people's thoughts and philosophy about education kind of overall. Why are we really here? Are we here for students to progress towards standards and mastery, or are we here just to give them something to learn, grade it, and go on? And so student work should actually be for student growth. They should be working toward a goal, and you should help them get there and support them along the way. And then this last one, a lot of people usually have problems with it. If assignments are late, teachers should deduct points. I will be interested to hear your perspective on this. This is going to be one of those questions on the discussion board, I think, that I'm going to ask, because there are two sides to this story. If they don't deduct points for late assignments, then they're not teaching responsibility. But if they do deduct points for late assignments, are they really focusing on student progress and mastery of the content? Or are they just working on piddly things? So there are two sides to that story, and I'll be interested to hear yours. So the benefits of using digital tools are a lot. There are a lot of benefits of using digital tools. For you as a teacher, it helps you keep track of student progress through documentation, so you can go back and look at how they've progressed over time. If you do a lot of the same kinds of things, then that is, or if they have a Google folder like we do, you can see student progress throughout the semester. Um, a lot of these digital tools are interactive, engaging. You aren't going to have students who are passive. They actually have to get on and interact. And some students are quiet or introverted and they don't feel comfortable just speaking out in class. But if you give them something where they can write down their thoughts or they can voice it in some other way, then they are going to be engaged. Also, these digital tools allow for a lot of individualization of learning, personalization, and that's really important because learning and teaching and learning are getting more personalized, not less. And so these digital tools really help that to happen. You can see your class progress as a whole. There are a lot of products and apps and things like that that you can see how many in your class are getting the right answer, or how the group of students that are struggling. So you can put them in a group and maybe work with them one-on-one. So it helps with that. And then it helps with learning through the assessment. Actually, I'm not sure if we won't be able to do this, learn through Kahoot, but in my seated technology class, we actually do the syllabus as a Kahoot game instead of just telling you about stuff. So they answer a question and then we talk about what part of the class that refers is referring to. And so we're learning through that assessment. They answer the question, but I still get to teach them the content. And you can do that with anything, not just with the syllabus. It also helps with teacher professional growth. So I can keep track of whether what I'm using is helping my students to learn. I think I'm going to take this slide off and just put it on the website. But in this session, you are actually going to look at and make an example for an assessment tool. So you're going to play around with some tools, see how they work. And if I were you, I would think about how you could utilize one of the tools for your HyperDocs lesson. So the example that you create could then go on your HyperDocs lesson, and that is totally fine with me. So that is it about assessment. So I look forward to hearing your important ideas and aspects and your questions from the resources for this week.